Chapter 13. Arthur. Arthur stared at Kay in shock. Of all the things he'd expected his foster brother to say, this was definitely not one of them. "What did you just say?" he asked, trying to keep the tremble from his voice. This was not a time to show weakness, not with everyone in the kingdom watching, not to mention the Saxons. "I think you heard me, Wart," Kay snarled, spitting out Arthur's nickname as if it were a bad joke. "You don't deserve to be up here, and you certainly shouldn't be running the kingdom." Arthur paled. Oh no, not now. Not in front of the Saxons, not when he just proposed an alliance. He'd known from the start it was possible there would be someone someday who felt the need to challenge his kingship. He was only a child after all, untrained in just about everything to do with being a king. It made sense that someone would eventually rise up and try to take him down. He just hadn't expected it to be his own brother. He stole a glance over to the table where the Saxons were sitting. Ping Baltimore was watching the scene with steely eyes. He did not look pleased. Wonderful. "What are you doing?" Arthur asked through clenched teeth, trying to keep his voice as low as possible so no one else could hear him. "If you have a problem with me, can we just talk about it later, privately? At least not in front of the entire kingdom and our invited guests?" Kay shook his head. "No," he said loudly, "for this concerns your entire court." He beckoned to the crowded room with his hand. "No one wants to say it, so I will. You are too young to be our king. Why, you haven't even grown your first whiskers yet," he jeered, as if he himself had some kind of grisly beard. Arthur heard a few nervous laughs from the crowd. It made him want to crawl under the table. Why was Kay doing this? And why now of all times? He could feel Guinevere's eyes on him from the side, but couldn't bring himself to look at her. Whatever he said next might change the course of history, and he would be responsible for the outcome. "I hate to inform you, brother," he said stiffly, "but whiskers don't make a king. I may be young, but I pulled the sword from the stone," and as the prophecy says, his words were cut off by Kay's mocking laugh. "The prophecy," he spit out. "England's king was meant to be decided by a tournament, and because you pulled some sword from some stone, I never got my chance to compete. Does that seem fair to anyone?" He turned to the crowd, who was still watching the whole thing as if it were some kind of riveting play. Sir Edgar rose from his seat. "Well, I certainly don't think so," he bellowed, and Arthur grinned as he noticed a few people nodding in agreement. And why not, he thought. To be honest, he himself had never thought it was quite fair, and he never asked for it either. In fact, the last thing he'd wanted was to become King of England, though he wasn't quite sure dim-witted Kay would fare any better. He realized Kay was waiting for an answer. "What do you want from me?" he asked, not knowing what else to say. "I came to London for a tournament," Kay replied, "and I'm still waiting for my chance to fight." He sneered at Arthur. "Face me in single combat. We'll see once and for all who's really meant to be king." Arthur swallowed hard. He could feel his forehead break out into a cold sweat. Kay wanted to fight him? His brother was 10 times bigger than Arthur and probably 20 times stronger. Not to mention he had years of training, whereas Arthur had none. Heavenly prophecy or no, if he fought Kay, Arthur would not stand a chance. He could feel Guinevere's hand on his arm. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Just call your guards. Have them take him away." It was a good idea, but Arthur knew it would serve as only a temporary reprieve. Kay would be back, or others would take his place. The gauntlet had been thrown, and he had to prove himself worthy of the throne, or everyone would remain in doubt. The Saxons would think him a coward. They might start thinking twice about the treaty. And so Arthur squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. "Name your time and place," he said simply. "I will answer your challenge." There were gasps from the crowd. Kay's smile widened. Excellent, he said. I knew you'd see reason. He pressed his fist against the table, leaning forwards, so close Arthur could smell his foul breath. Meet me in the courtyard tomorrow morning, and we shall battle, and to the victor goes the kingdom. I will be there, Arthur replied, hoping he sounded brave. In reality, he was shaking like a leaf. Kay smirked, then turned and stormed out of the great hall. As the heavy door swung shut behind him, the court erupted into conversation. Arthur guessed they would probably be making wagers on the battle, and he assumed most of them would not be in his favor. Not that he blamed them. His odds of beating a trained warrior in hand-to-hand combat were next to nothing. What were you thinking? Guinevere demanded, grabbing his arm. He turned to look at her and realized her face was ashen with fear. You're never going to win against a man like that. He grimaced. Thanks for your support. I'm sorry, she hung her hand. I'm just trying to be sensible. Arthur watched as she inhaled a long breath through her teeth. Look, maybe, she began hesitantly, maybe you should just give him what he wants. What? Arthur looked shocked. Do you really like being king? Being trapped here in this castle under guard? I saw you out in the forest. You seemed happier there. You could go back to that. Arthur stared at her. She wasn't wrong, and it was a tempting thought, to say the least. To just walk away from it all, get a second chance at a simple life. One where he didn't have to make rules or avoid wars or be responsible for the well-being of people he had never met. And all he would have to do was give up his crown, which didn't even fit. But then his eyes traveled to the Saxon table. They were all watching closely, their faces guarded, but clearly concerned. Arthur remembered his conversation with Kay the week before. His foster brother had called Saxons barbarians. He said they deserved to be destroyed. If he backed down now, abdicated the throne, these men, who had come here under his protection and promise of peace, would likely be arrested where they sat, taken to a dungeon, maybe even killed. All talks of peace would be over. The kingdom would erupt into war. I can't, he said sadly. As much as I might want to, there's too much at stake. He gestured to the Saxons. Guinevere nodded unhappily, as if she'd known this would be his answer all along. You can't sign a peace treaty if you're dead, she said in a low voice. He bit his lower lip. Well, then, I'm just going to have to figure out a way to stay alive. Chapter 14. Guinevere. The feast went late into the night, and by the end of it, the Saxons and Englishmen were making merry with one another, dancing and laughing, as if they were long-lost friends. In fact, the only person who didn't look like he was having fun was Arthur himself. Sure, he tried to keep a brave face, but Guinevere could see the traces of fear in his eyes that he couldn't quite hide, and she couldn't help feeling sorry for him. She was convinced, at this point, he didn't know about the evil Merlin had done. He'd been tricked into thinking he was meant to be king, which made her quest a lot more difficult. She knew he still needed to be brought down, but she didn't want him to get hurt in the process. If only he'd just given up the throne, walked away from it all when he had the chance. But he wouldn't, she realized. He felt responsible for the people of England. He hadn't been king long, but he cared about the realm and its chance at peace. He had all the instincts of a good leader, even if he wasn't meant to sit on the throne. Eventually, she left the feast to retire to her humble little bedroom down the hall from the kitchens. She was just about to take off her itchy gown and replace it with a soft night garment when she heard a scratching at her window. She pulled open the wooden shutters. Servants, of course, didn't get real glass windows like kings did, and found a little purple squirrel on the other side twitching its nose at her. She raised an eyebrow. "Mother?" she whispered. "Is that you?" Not that she had much doubt in the matter. The purple rather gave it away. As the squirrel hopped up onto the windowsill, Guinevere ran to lock her door. Then she headed back to the window, scooped up the squirrel in her arms, and took it over to her bed. A moment later, there was a quick poof, and the squirrel disappeared, replaced by Mim. "Ugh, I hate squirrels," Mim grumped, brushing off her muddy dress with her hands. "They're so dirty and smelly. Rats with bushy tails, that's all they are." Guinevere nodded dutifully, even though she was quite fond of squirrels herself. "What are you doing here, Mother?" she asked, trying not to notice all the dirt and mud flakes landing on her bed as her mother continued to shake out her dress. Why had Mim felt the need to use magic instead of just coming through the front door like a normal person? "Why, I'm here to see you, of course. I missed you, my dear. It's so dreadfully boring in the cottage without you dancing around all the time. I even had to play card games by myself, which I won, of course. You do get such a better chance of winning when you play both sides of the table," she giggled. Guinevere couldn't help a small smile. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed her mother's silly banter. "I'm glad you're here," she assured her. "Only it's very late at night. I would think you would want to wait till morning." Mim waved her off. "Sleep is for the weak, and I couldn't wait. Not when I heard the news." The news? So much had happened that night. Guinevere was at a loss as to what her mother might be referring to. Did she mean the Saxon Treaty? Sir Kay's challenge to Arthur? "The whole town is buzzing about it," Mim clucked. "The mysterious blonde girl in the blue dress who danced through court like an angel and dined like royalty with the king himself." She gave Guinevere a meaningful look. "It seems you've been enjoying yourself, my dear." "Oh, that." Guinevere stared down at her, feeling sheepish. "Yes, Arthur invited me to dinner tonight. I, thought it would be a good chance for me to spy on him, as you asked me to." "Indeed, my pet," Mim looked positively gleeful. "Earn his trust and friendship, and then pow! Off with his head." She cackled loudly. "I mean, not literally, of course," she added as she caught Gwen's horrified look. She leaned in closer. Her eyebrows waggled. "So tell dear mother, what have you learned about our boy King? Anything useful we can use against him?" Guinevere opened her mouth to speak, but strangely, nothing came out. Instead, she felt a weird shimmer of unease waft through her stomach. She had plenty to tell Mim from her day with Arthur, so why was she suddenly feeling reluctant to share it? "Well, come on, girl," Mim scolded. "We don't have all night." She puffed up her wild purple hair with her hands. "I need my beauty sleep, you know. I mean, not that I'm not perfectly lovely as I am," she added, preening at her reflection in Guinevere's water basin. "Sorry," Guinevere mumbled. She forced herself to straighten her shoulders and draw in a deep breath before giving her report. "The Saxons arrived tonight and dined with the king. Arthur presented his idea of a peace treaty, and they're going to tell him tomorrow whether they want to sign it." "Bah!" Mim spit on the floor. "This was exactly what I was afraid of." Guinevere bit her lower lip. "But why?" "What do you mean, why?" Mim looked at her, puzzled. "I don't know, it's just..." Gwen shrugged. "Why don't we want peace? I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing?" "Well, yes, I mean, of course it would," Mim stammered, looking a little taken aback by the question. "Peace would be wonderful, just peachy. We all want peace. Of course we do. It's just that, well, how do we know it's not a trick? Maybe they're pretending to want peace, just to let our guard down. Just to get us to let our guard down. After all, you know how Saxons can be. She gave Guinevere a pointed look, as if daring her to argue. Then she waved a hand dismissively. Anyway, what else did you learn? Guinevere gnawed on her lower lip. Well, Arthur's foster brother, Sir Kay, has challenged his right to the throne. She had a feeling her mother was going to appreciate this piece of news more than the first. They're set to fight first thing tomorrow morning. Arthur had to agree to it, or he'd risk looking weak in front of the Saxons. But I'm afraid he's not going to be up for the challenge. He's just a boy, and this knight is an experienced warrior. Mim rubbed her hands together in glee. Now that's more like it. If we're lucky, maybe he'll manage to ruin everything on his own. But then Kay would be king, Guinevere protested, and he's not the rightful ruler either. Mim shrugged. Well, we can't have everything, now can we, my dear? But that seems kind of like a big thing, Guinevere insisted. She was starting to get really confused. I mean, Arthur's actually a good king. He's young, but he's smart, and he seems to care about people. Mim pinched Guinevere's cheeks hard. Oh, my dear sweet girl, she cooed. Do not tell me that you're falling for this usurper's lies. She released Guinevere's cheeks and danced to the other side of the room. He may seem innocent enough, but never forget what master he serves. Guinevere flinched. Merlin, she said softly. Merlin, Mim affirmed. You know, he seemed quite lovely once upon a time, too. Just a dear old doddering fool. Until he slaughtered your parents in cold blood, that is. She gave Gwyn a hard look. And the apple, my dear, never falls far from the tree. Gwyn swallowed hard, her mind racing. She thought back to Arthur at the banquet, talking so lovely about his teacher. Something wasn't adding up. Why did Merlin kill my parents? She blurted out before she could stop herself. For a moment, Mim froze. Then she laughed. I've told you this story 1,000 times, she reminded Gwyn. Yes, Guinevere agreed, but you never told me why. Why did he want to kill my parents? I mean, he must have had a reason. Because he's evil, obviously, Mim replied. And evil people do evil things. There's no sense in looking any deeper than that, my darling. You'll only drive yourself mad. Right, Guinevere sighed. Clearly she wasn't going to get any more information out of her mother tonight. But there had to be more than this than she'd been told. After all, the Merlin of Mim's stories were so unlike the Merlin of Arthur's. So which was the true Merlin? And what did he really want from Camelot? Chapter 15. Arthur. This is pure foolishness, boy. Pure foolishness, I say. Archimedes flew from one end of Arthur's bedroom to the other, his wings flapping furiously. It was still early in the morning, and Arthur wondered if the owl had slept at all the night before. Merlin used to joke that Archimedes was especially grumpy when he stayed out all night. Or maybe it was just the situation that had him all riled up. What am I supposed to do? Arthur asked with a shrug. It's not like I want to fight him, but I have no choice. You always have a choice. In fact, you could have chosen to put that sword back where you found it, for that matter, like I told you to. Then you wouldn't be in this mess. Well, it's too late for that now, and a lot of people are depending on me. I can't let them down by being a coward. Being a coward? How about being stupid and getting yourself killed? I'd imagine that would also let a few people down. First and foremost, me. Aw, Archimedes, I didn't know you cared. Arthur couldn't help teasing. The owl huffed, offended. Please, I could care less of what you do with your own skin. I just don't want to have to deal with Merlin coming back and learning I let his favorite pupil be pounded into a pancake while he was gone. Archimedes grumbled. I don't need that kind of pressure on my handsome feathered shoulders. Thank you very much. Come on, Archimedes, Arthur pegged. A little faith? Faith, trust, and pixie dust, Archimedes spat. And we're all out of pixie dust. What's pixie dust? Arthur asked, cocking his head. And why would we need that? The owl rolled his eyes. It's just an expression. Something Merlin used to say. The point is, having faith is one thing. Having smarts is quite another. And you clearly don't have any of those. Arthur sighed. Look, I'm not going to let myself get pounded, all right? I've been in dangerous situations before. Like when Merlin turned me into a fish, and a squirrel, and a bird. Yes, give the boy a medal for his marvelous near misses. Believe me, I was there to witness them. But this time, I can't fly in and save you if you get yourself in a jam. No. But I can use the lessons I learned from those experiences. Like the one about brains being just as good as brawn. I may not be as strong as Kay, but I'm pretty sure I'm smarter. That big rock out on the courtyard is likely smarter than your foster brother, Archimedes admitted reluctantly. Exactly. And I know Kay's fighting style. I helped him train for years, remember? I know he's weaker on his left side, and when he faints right, he leaves his neck exposed. It used to drive Sir Edgar mad. I suppose knowledge like that could be useful, the owl hedged. Exactly. Knowledge. That was what Merlin always tried to teach me, that knowledge is just as powerful as a sword. I could do this, Archimedes, he added, feeling excitement well inside of him for the first time since Kay had approached his table. I know I can. Well, you certainly have confidence, I'll give you that. The owl spun his head. And I suppose there's no talking you out of this? No, sir. Arthur shook his head, walking over to Excalibur and giving it a thoughtful look. The sword was heavy enough when he wore it on his belt. He was pretty sure he wouldn't be able to swing it more than a time or two. Even then, without much control and accuracy. But if all went according to plan, he wouldn't need that. Oh, Merlin, he thought. I really hope you're right. After trying without much luck to swallow a quick breakfast, Arthur got dressed and made his way to the castle courtyard, where the makeshift tournament was to be held. When he arrived, a crowd of spectators had already gathered, pushing and shoving one another as they fought their way up onto the wooden stands, trying to get the best spot to watch the fight. In fact, there were so many of them there. Arthur half wondered if they outnumbered the crowd at his coronation. But then, it was not every day the King of England took on his own knight. The Saxon king, Valdemar, met him at the gate. He looked down at Arthur, studying him carefully. Are you certain about this? He asked, his voice tense with concern. Arthur squared his shoulders, or he tried to at least. The chainmail armor he was wearing was supposed to be lighter than plate, but it was still unbearably heavy. Don't worry, he said. I have a plan, and I plan to win. The king nodded, though he didn't look quite convinced. I hope so, he said, for I do not like the way your challenger looks at us. I get the feeling he will not be so eager to sign a treaty if he emerges victorious. No, he probably won't be, Arthur agreed, wanting to be honest. He shuffled them from foot to foot. In fact, it may be a good idea for you to head out of town now, while you still have the freedom to do so, just in case. If the worst happens, I do not want you to have to pay for my failure as king. King Valdemar looked at him thoughtfully. You are wise beyond your years, boy king, he said. And I can see you truly care for others, even above your own self. That's a rare quality in a leader, he smiled. But like you, we are not cowards. We do not retreat in the face of adversity. We will stay and cheer for your victory. And when you emerge the winner, he added, emphasizing the when, we will sign your treaty. Arthur's face flushed. It was all he could do not to break out into a happy dance. But he forced his feet to remain firmly on the ground. Thank you, he said. Then we talk this afternoon. I look forward to it. King Baltimore gave him a deep bow, then turned and headed back to where his men were gathered. Arthur watched him go, drawing a slow breath. He appreciated the faith shown in him, and he just hoped he could prove worthy of it. A moment later, Sir Pellinore approached. "Are you set, lad?" he asked, looking at Arthur a bit doubtfully. Kay has indicated he's ready to fight. A chill tripped down Arthur's spine, all of his earlier confidence in front of King Baltimore instantly deflating. He glanced out into the courtyard to see Kay warming up by swinging his sword against a wooden post. He was dressed in a full suit of plate armor and looked 10 feet tall. Arthur grinned, looking down at his own paltry suit of chainmail that didn't even fit well. What was he doing? Archimedes was right. This was pure foolishness. No, he scolded himself. It did him no good to panic before the fight even began. Keeping his head was the one chance he had to win this. And he had to win this. Everything depended on it. "I'm ready," he told Pellinore, trying to make his voice sound calm and confident. He drew in a breath and walked past the older knight, heading out onto the makeshift field, keeping his head held high. The crowd broke out into loud cheers as they caught sight of their king, and shouts of "Long live King Arthur!" resounded through the space. Arthur caught a quick glimpse of Kay's scowl before his foster brother put his helmet over his head. "All right," Sir Pellinore announced, stepping into the courtyard and addressing the crowd in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "The fight shall begin when I raise and lower this flag. The rules are simple. Fight with honor, fight with bravery, and fight to the death." Wait, what? Arthur stopped short at the last part. Clearly no one had thought to mention that pesky little to the death detail earlier. While yes, tournaments often ended with knights being maimed or killed, it was never the intended result. He gnawed on his lower lip. This was not good at all. Not only did he not want to die himself, obviously, he also didn't want to have to kill his foster brother if the fates turned in his favor. While he was truly angry at Kay for putting him in this position, he didn't mean he wanted him dead. "Worry about it later," he scolded himself. "Right now, you have to fight and stay alive." Arthur watched as Kay unsheathed his sword and followed the move with his own, trying not to notice how heavy Excalibur felt in his hands, his muscles already wobbling from the effort. His heart pounded as he took a moment to gaze over the crowd before facing his opponent. Suddenly, his eyes fell on Guinevere, who was sitting in the very back row of the stands, dressed in a simple homespun dress of undyed wool, her hair plaited into 2 matching braids. Arthur threw her a small friendly smile and waved in her direction, happy to see a familiar face. She smiled back at him, just for a moment, then bashfully dropped her gaze to her lap. But it was enough. Arthur felt his confidence rising again. She had come, which meant she cared. And if he won this, perhaps they could dine together again. It was almost reason enough to win, in and of itself. It was then that he noticed something at her side. Make that someone. An old woman dressed in common pleasant clothes, which wouldn't have normally struck him as usual, except the clothes were purple, and so was her hair. He swallowed hard. Oh no, had Min come back? Now of all times? And somehow she found Guinevere? She must have heard that Gwyn had been his guest at dinner last night. From what Archimedes had told him, the whole town had been talking about it. Had Arthur put his new friend in danger? He tried to get Gwyn's attention again, but she had turned to look at Mim, who was whispering something in her ear. Gwyn looked uncomfortable as she glanced back out onto the field. What had the wizard said to her? It took all Arthur had inside of him not to rush the stand. not to rush. It took all Arthur had inside of him not to rush the stands and make sure Guinevere was safe. But at that moment, the trumpet sounded through the air, indicating the start of the fight. Arthur turned to see Sir Pellinore raising his flag, then dropping it. This was it. The battle had begun. Before Arthur could even think of saving Guinevere, he'd have to find a way to save himself.